Agile session, Transforming Life Sciences and Commercial Content at the Indegene Digital Summit. My name is Carrie, and very excited to share some insights from some industry leaders today. As a little background, in the last 10 years, we've really seen a technology boom. It's led to a lot of new channels, a lot of new data, and a proliferation of learnings. And this has given us the opportunity to accelerate planning and really start to think about customer centricity and meeting customers where they are. So Agile has become a mainstay in a part of that digital lexicon. And today we want to explore the value and the challenges that people are facing as they implement Agile methodologies within their organizations. So today we have a great panel together. Gunjan Tyagaraja, who is the lead of, she's the VP of Marketing and US Implementation at Amgen, was not able to join us live. And so we are sticking with the rest of the crew. We've got Chad Lacrosse, who is the VP, Head of US Commercial Brand and Operations IT at AbbVie. Brian Cantwell, who is the VP of Digital Strategy and Operations at Bayer. And Nathan Bowmaker, who is Head of Global Commercial Operations for AstraZeneca. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yes.
Thank you, Carrie.
Awesome. So, Chad, let's kick it off with you. Why Agile and why now?
Well, we're nothing if we're not Agile, Carrie. We just with the technology challenges that we had this morning, right? But whether it's the pandemic or the volatility of the current economic environment, the world is changing faster than it's ever changed before, and our stakeholders' needs are changing as fast. In the past, traditional approaches just can't really respond to the changing environment around us. Traditional approaches for content production, traditional approaches for measurement and learning. And so we need to do something different. That's really the case for change. Technology, data collection, and methodologies like Agile have evolved to the point where we can be different now. It's not out of our reach in this industry. And so in order to sort of take advantage of the opportunity that exists, now's the time for Agile. Plus, I think customer-centric companies have also learned that personalization works. While we're all professionals and while we're all in the healthcare industry with a lot of regulations, we're also consumers. And it works on us, right? Can't tell you how many things my wife or I buy on Instagram or on Facebook or on other platforms because the message is right at the right time. And so the environment is changing, and there's a business opportunity, and so thus the opportunity is at hand.
That's great, thanks. Brian, for you guys, you've been on the newer side to implementing this within your organization for about a year. So what are some of the most important things that you would share with others who are thinking about getting started right now?
Sure. So thanks, Carrie. You're right. We're about a little over a year into our Agile transformation journey. And I'll just build on a little bit of what Chad said and maybe add a piece to it, because I think Chad hit the nail on the head in terms of the macro environment around us has changed so much over the last 5 to 10 years, right? And data's there, technology is a part of that. But I think the biggest thing that's shifted, and Chad kind of alluded to this, is customer expectation, right? Like customers have an expectation that you're going to deliver a message to them that is relevant to them. And that requires different content. It requires a different process to generate that content. And so that was a big part of our case for change. We realized that we couldn't just generate content the way we had generated content previously. And so over the last year and a half, I think for us, it hasn't just been about the methodology, right? Scrums and backlogs and Kanban boards and the like, right? I mean, those are tools that are a part of an Agile transformation. But for us, it's been as much about a new way of working, a new operating model, not just the methodology. And that operating model has allowed us to connect to new roles and new capabilities in the organization. So we've invested significantly in building out a digital team and digital capabilities that bring things in-house that historically were done through agencies. Media being an example, some content production, creative services being other examples. We've also built out analytics capabilities that are now accessible through this model. So we basically created a bunch of new roles, created new capabilities, and the way that they all work together is through this Agile model. Now, if I'd say there's two things we've learned in our journey, it's that first off, and I think everyone says this, and so maybe it's cliche, but like the change management is hard, right? It is difficult to get people to do things differently from how they've previously done them. And pushing it top down and centrally, which is how a lot of organizations go about these types of transformations, is not going to get you, the full end result you're looking for. So that's not to say that leadership support isn't important. It is. But you need to have as much bottoms up kind of day-to-day marketer support for your transformation as you do top down leadership support for your transformation. Otherwise, your day-to-day marketers, who are the ones who have to fundamentally do things differently than how they've done them, aren't going to embrace the change. They're going to say, this is different, this is new, I don't understand it, and I want to go back kind of to my comfort zone of how I was used to working. So that's learning number one. Learning number two is that it's not one size fits all, right? And that's actually how you get the marketing organizations more plugged into this, is like their brand strategies are different, their content's different, their messages are different. And where we've seen the most successful adoption a year and a half in with our brand teams, it's with the brand teams that have really embraced and said, you know what, okay, I understand, Scrum, and we're going to use Jira for this, and we're going to have, a backlog, and we're going to have a sprint planning session. I understand that, but like, here's how I'm going to do it in a way that makes sense to our brand. And so they've really taken ownership and embraced it in a way that is specific to them. So I think those are my two learnings. It's not just about driving it top down and centrally. And you really need to allow your individual brand teams, your marketing teams, to make this work for them and not take a one size fits all approach.
Thank you for sharing that this is not easy. I think that's a really important message because it is definitely not about the sticky notes and moving them around the board. Nathan, I actually want to bounce off of what Brian just shared and get your perspective from the global side. And how are you working either globally and or with local markets to implement these methodologies? And what unique challenges might be there?
So I think, to Brian's point, one size doesn't fit all. We see in certain brands, certain complexities, certain markets, the response and desire to Agile is really strong. And I think, particularly in the US, with the complexity of the channels and everything we're trying to achieve, Agile really suits and works really well. What we see in some of our sort of European markets is actually some of the principles we are thinking about. I can talk about those later in terms of how we want to organize ourselves, how we want to deliver work, can be done without necessarily buying into the full Agile, Scrum, and that. And, for me, the simplification that we've delivered, and I think it's some of those principles of Agile that have forced us to think that way, means that we've got similar benefits without necessarily having to deploy the full sort of Scrum capability. And that's worked for us, certain markets. And I think we'll continue to evolve that way. I think, certainly as we think about some of our international markets, where it's smaller, simpler applications, I'm not certain that the Scrum methodology or needing to go down that is really worthwhile for some of those sort of simple campaigns and executions. But really, I think for us, a balanced approach, depending on where the brand teams are at, the market's at, is the right way for us to go.
That's great. Chad, when we were prepping here, you also had some thoughts on prioritizing brands and thinking about where to get started. What would you add there?
Yeah, I think I think when you, as Brian mentioned, I think when you consider where a brand is in its life cycle, when you think about the digital responsiveness of marketing for a specific brand, they're not all created equal. If you think about a product that's in its launch phase, brand new product launch, whether it's an indication or whether it's the product itself. There's just so many moving parts and variables that all are marching towards the same, PDUFA date, same product launch date. That maybe this way of working with so many tasks and so many things, it isn't the best fit. It would be very difficult to coordinate that. If you think about on the other end of the spectrum, a product that is in its in the waning years of its patent and on market value, that there's the stakeholders know a lot about that product, and there's not as much to say. Maybe there's not as much new research, or there's not as much new information. And so I think we find that products that are just after launch, there's great opportunities to learn a lot about the perception of your messaging and your go-to-market strategy right after launch. I think there's also opportunities in the middle of the product life cycle. And so I think that's something that's a consideration when you're picking where to start, Carrie. I also think that if you step back and you think about, like, I want to get started down this journey, which brand do I pick? Which market do I pick? Which you could also get paralyzed a little bit when you start to think about all of the things that you have to have in place in order for this to be effective. You could say, we're not going to start Agile until we have core claims library. We're not going to start Agile until we have modular content. We're not going to start Agile until we have real-time measurement and all of our data centralized. We're not going to start Agile until all of our MarTech and AdTech platforms are integrated. And I think that that's something that you need to avoid. You need to start, because as Brian and Nathan, but there's a lot of things that you learn within the culture of your company. And sometimes you don't need as many of those enablers as what you might think, right? And there's a phrase that says perfection is the enemy of progress. And so get started and apply Agile to learning and advancing those enablers as well.
So, do you see impact of Agile beyond? I know we're hyper focused on content, we're hyper focused on marketing right now, but what is the impact of Agile across the broader organization, and how does that start to affect partnerships? How does it start to affect finances and resourcing?
Well, at AbbVie, we're applying Agile both in our IT organization and sort of the traditional IT adoption. But on the business side, we're using it in really three use cases. One is for content. Another is for measurement. Mm-hmm. So testing and learning and adjusting. And then the third is really in machine learning, data science, and advanced analytics, and how we gain much deeper insights about our stakeholders and use that information. And so I think all three are very valid use cases. Which one you picked and where you start is going to depend on sort of the problems that you're trying to solve. Yes, right. As Agile starts to take off within the company, and you have more and more Agile pods, there are going to be a number of things that you have to consider and figure out how to manage and how to change alongside of it. You mentioned the financial planning process, right? Scrum teams tend to represent an investment of a certain number of people working together. And it's really disruptive if you're going to disband that team after a single tactic, right? And so essentially you've got to make a decision to invest in a team that's 10 to 12 people big, right? Amazon would say the 2 pizza team. And so that's different, right? You can't just turn that off, and you can't just turn that on. You have to have a sort of a longer term commitment to doing that. That changes the way that you do your financial planning. That changes the way that you engage with agencies and with the way that you would normally write agency SOWs. That changes roles and responsibilities. It changes who you hire. It changes how you measure performance. And then that only extrapolates itself. I think we're about up to 8 what we call digital brand teams or pod teams here at AbbVie right now. And so the more that you add, then the kind of infrastructure that you need in order to manage the coordination of these teams that are working in parallel. So, but you could read a book, you could listen to a podcast, you could watch a webinar like this, and And we could give you all the tips and tricks, but until you really, start on this journey, you're not going to learn everything that you thought that that you need to know before getting in. And so again, I would just encourage people to start small, gain some wins, and use those wins in order to build consensus and buy-in across the organization.
Yeah, thank you. This is an open question. Anyone is welcome to answer. I think one of the promises of Agile, realistically for the marketer, is to sort of get them a little bit out of the day-to-day, right? And figure out, there's a little bit of meeting paralysis within life sciences. I think we all recognize this. But the idea is there's a little bit of fear of missing out for marketers. And so what have you seen as the end effect for them to actually get some of that freedom to think about the strategy and really focus on what do we want to do next? What trends are we seeing in the data that would indicate that we need to adjust? And that's open to any of you.
Yeah, I'll try and hit that. I mean, I think like it's been shared, we've gone on our journey of Agile pods and across the entire sort of omni-channel sort of customer journey across content channels, reporting, and that's three areas really sort of, step out that we benefited from, which I think create that space that you're talking about, Carrie, for our marketeers to do other things. So the simplification, the quality of impact, and the speed have done all that. Simplification for us, for the marketeers really has been that we've gone from where we were before, where we were sort of just drowning in swim lanes and waterfalls, to marketeers who are now saying, and I love these guys, they'll sell anything, but they're saying the pod's the best thing in my life. And I wish it to be true in one breath and I don't in another, because I think surely this marketeer's got to have something else in their life apart from an Agile pod. But these sort of opportunities have created them to focus on the quality of impact. So things that they've been able to do from that sort of freeing up of time are, work on sort of optimizing our paid search, looking at our content effectiveness, taking out sort of ineffective sort of media spend, things that are outside of just we've got to get the project done. It's giving people time to think about their customers, think about how we reach their customers, and adapt and change what we're doing. And the speed improvements, 20-60%, whatever it is, through all the things that Brian was talking about before in terms of the Scrum calls and the retros and everything, they're all great mechanisms. And I would say that we have given people the ability to respond quickly and space to think and deliver it in a cost-effective manner. And that really is what we've done. I'm not an Agile purist. I'm not someone who's going to stand here and say, and that is a problem. I think sometimes we bring people into these Scrum roles and they are purist, and sometimes there's life outside of the pod. We have to explain that sometimes, which can be difficult. But from my perspective, the best way of showing impact, to like Chad was saying, the best way of showing impact is by doing, not telling. And I think that's where we're at. Actually, people are seeing the benefits, and it's working, and people are able to use those benefits for something meaningful for their brand and customers.
Yeah, Carrie, maybe I can jump in and share a little bit about some of the results we've seen, because I'll kind of describe results in two contexts, right? So I think the reason why we adopted this new operating model and brought Agile into the organization was really, as I mentioned before, to unlock these new capabilities. So part of our value proposition and the results we've been able to create, it's hard to say, oh, this is because of Agile. It's really because of our new way of working. It's because of the overall operating model and the new capabilities that we've brought into the organization. Those capabilities are tapped into because we have the operating model and the Agile approach. So, so things like bringing new content creation, content production, creative services capabilities into the organization that have proven an ability to deliver creative output and produced content output at less than half the cost of our traditional approaches. So there's dramatic kind of marketing cost efficiency gains that we're seeing. I think that on the other front, you mentioned what benefits does this have to the marketer? And I think it really comes down to, the point around it's not one size fits all. And there's some marketers that really struggle with this approach because they're used to being kind of that content project manager role. right? They're used to managing the day-to-day of their creative agency and the MLR process, and making sure that all those things are getting executed from a project management perspective. And maybe their strong suit was not being the brand strategist and taking a step back and looking at the data and drawing insights and determining how to improve going forward. And I found that profile of marketer struggles a bit with the roles and responsibilities and the change in this model, because what we've brought in is subject matter experts that can kind of handle each of those pieces. There's stuff that we've taken away from the agency and brought in either an in-house team or a more cost-effective approach, or a subject matter expert who can tackle that. Now, where we've seen the marketers, and I kind of mentioned some of our marketing teams who are kind of the poster children for successful adoption of the model, are the ones that have the marketers that have seen the opportunity and said, wow, now I can actually take a step back and focus more on, like, I come in, I make sure that our strategic direction is accounted for in the backlog and that we're focusing on the right things, right? And we can look at kind of the learning opportunities, and then I can step back and let all the machine wheels turn and all of the content creation services execute. And so I think it's, we see inconsistency across our teams in terms of how successful the adoption is and the value generated. And I think a lot of it has to do with those two different profiles of marketer.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's just a challenge in general across the organization now, and I think you characterize it sort of really well with that sort of marketeer project manager. And now we actually truly want data-driven marketeers. And I think we're all on this journey, and we have the need, and that we do this through the digital sort of part of our organization to bring these two things up in parallel. There's no point just having this capability set there ready to run if we don't have our marketeers sort of pull through and ready to run with it. And those are two key elements. So anyone who's thinking of doing this, don't just go for the infrastructure. You've got to think about the people who are going to be interacting with this, and it's different as well, especially when you introduce some of the agile concepts. We need people to do things. Yes, you need to be a doer. If you're the product owner, you do things. Not just sort of direct traffic. And that's also a sort of an interesting perspective for people, that they realize now that we don't have people who are there just to sort of oversee and see what's going on. It's people, hands in tools, doing things, describing things. It's a different approach, I think, in general. But as I said, one that I think is certainly paying benefits at the moment.
Yeah, to sort of build on that, I 100% agree with both Nathan and Brian in terms of the ability of marketers to really move from coordinators, project managers, to truly doing marketing. I don't know that anybody, well, then maybe their skills have developed in one way or another way. I don't know anyone who's gone into marketing because they wanted to be a project coordinator. And so this really gives them the potential to, live the career that they thought that they were getting into from the beginning. And, whether you use the phrase, somebody moved the cheese or the iceberg is melting, right? Things are changing. And you're hearing pharmaceutical companies talk about this change and the change in the role of marketers, not just on this webinar, but, it's easy to Google agile marketing and see that it's changing. And so I think for those folks who are marketing professionals, this is something to embrace, because this is the way that the industry is going, and it's also outside of our industry. So I think it's something that you should embrace for the sake of career development and for your future. But there's also, what we've seen is employee satisfaction and employee engagement for people who are members of these integrated cross-functional pod teams is really high. They love being part of a team who is oriented around the same set of goals and objectives, right? As a project coordinator, oftentimes you're working in a pull culture where you're trying to pull all your shared services partners and pull your agencies to a specific date that you're trying to go into. I think naturally a cultural difference when you're working in an agile way is a small team, all oriented around the same objective, all driving towards it, instead of having to put so much energy into pulling. You're really pushing, and as a result, you're really getting to impact faster.
That's great.
And we're seeing,
I
right, we're
actually,
seeing those, we're seeing those results at AbbVie in terms of speed. My team and I reviewed some of our data engineering efforts around how we gather the data and provide insights to data scientists and marketers. Working in this way, we're 40% faster. I was on a phone call yesterday with our head of HCP CRM, and she said that we're making emails at least 20% faster, or excuse me, 20 times faster than in the previous model. So we're not talking small incremental changes. We're talking real speed gains as a result of adopting these ways of working.
that's great. I actually really like that you brought up engagement, and I'm very curious because, so yes, I think that's one of the idealistic parts of the Agile methodology, but also, and I haven't heard anyone say this yet, I think one of the biggest outcomes is impact on quality. And because everyone is engaged, we've heard speed, we've heard cost efficiencies. I'm curious if you're seeing quality improvements with having people working toward that common goal.
I mean, I think I mentioned quality is you know given. No one sets out to do a bad job.
Of course.
But what the process and the speed and that it's given us is that people can add additional quality into our executions, and I think it's that space that has allowed us the things I mentioned before. You know, that sort of looking at content effectiveness, looking at how messages are landing, finding why people are dropping out the funnel, getting, you know, the space we've created is getting better quality outcomes. And so for me, quality is very much part of the mix. Yeah, cost, speed, quality, they're all part of the mix here, absolutely.
Maybe, Carrie, I'd take a different, it's a different word that I'm going to use instead of quality, because I think we've had our ups and downs when it comes to the quality of output. And some of that has to do with the partners you bring in. Some of it has to do with the processes. Some of it has to do with getting used to maybe new technology platforms and the like. So I don't know that this process has improved our quality. I think what it's improved for the teams that are really embraced and adopted and shifted their mindset, it's improved focus. And that improved focus, which aligns the output of that Agile working group to the strategic priorities, generates content, generates campaigns, and ultimately generates results that are higher quality. So whether it's the quality of the tactic itself, right? Did we have as many errors in a produced web page or an email, or did this get executed on time, on budget? Like those types of quality considerations. I think those, I don't know, I haven't seen any improvement in those. Those have had their ups and downs, maybe outside of the model. But the improvement in end result, are we reaching the right audience? Are we reaching, did we have the focused attention on these tactics being the ones that will move the needle for the brand? That we have seen improvement on. And I can tell you across all of our franchises, we have seen the impact of digital promotion increase. We've seen revenue, top line growth that we can attribute to digital promotion increase over the last 2 years as we've been on this journey. And it's not just because we put some Agile methodology in place, it's because of everything that came with it. The whole operating model, the new ways of working, the new digital capabilities, the new talent and roles we brought into the organization. So I would say focus for us more so than quality.
I've come from this at a little bit different lens because I'm the IT guy here on the panel. And we do measure first time right. Whether it's web page errors or email errors, et cetera, whatever it might be. And we have in the areas that we've adopted this way of working, we have seen quality improve. First time right has gone up by an order of magnitude. If it didn't, we wouldn't have been able to achieve those speed measures that I shared earlier, because errors take cycle time. And so we have seen quality go up in the context of defects through using this approach.
That's great. So I think we are about at time and need to wrap up. So I will circle around. Nathan, any parting advice that you would offer for people who are watching and thinking about getting started here?
I just reflect that what this approach has given me hope and hope in the sense that 2 years ago we were at the Indegene conference and someone talking about customer data analytics, and they were questioning what's the point in real-time data when it still takes us 3 months to do a website and weeks to do an email. Why do you need this? And I sat there a couple of years ago and I was really challenged by that. I thought, yeah, that's true, and it's harsh, but it's true. And now we can respond. And so what I would say is, if you're needing some hope to figure out how you're actually going to get to respond to your customer in a time scale and a way that's going to be meaningful for them, have a look at this stuff. It helps.
All right, Brian.
Yeah, I would say I'll come back to where I kind of ended the last point, which is focus. If you feel like your organization lacks focus on your strategic priorities, if you feel like your brand teams are trying to tackle the entire annual brand plan in parallel, all at the same time, and you basically start the year in Q1, starting to generate content, start to create some stuff and get some output in Q2, actually get campaigns and tactics live in Q3, then take a pause so you can plan the next year, and then either end up with massive budget cuts or budget you need to spend in Q4, so everything kind of goes out the window from a strategic alignment perspective. If that's the way your year looks, which I think, if we're really being honest with ourselves, there's a lot of pharma companies that that's the way your year looks. So I would say if you're struggling with that, Agile methodology and bringing this type of an approach helps with that focus. It gets you from what's your strategic priority and can we get an output in the market related to that strategic priority in a shorter period of time, so then we can learn from it and then we can feed that back in and double down on what works and what doesn't work. So to me, that's the case for change. And I would also just encourage everyone to who's considering adopting methodology to make it not about the methodology. Make it about the business results you're trying to achieve. Look at the broader ecosystem and capabilities that go with it. And if your transformation should not just be about, hey, are we moving to scrums and backlogs and sprints? It should be, how do we engage customers and drive impact with content, with campaigns? And if that's the way that you approach it, and you look at the capabilities you need, the roles you need, then Agile seems to be a good approach to create focus in how you leverage those capabilities for maximum business impact.
That's great. Chad, anything, and then we'll move into the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. Great answers, guys. Carrie and the team here really picked some good panel members, because that's super insightful. I would say don't try to boil the ocean. Right? You're not going to, at the start, take on your entire marketing plan or your entire insights generation plan. Start with a handful of impactful use cases that really are trying to solve some known brand challenges. And then from there, I also suggest, dedicate the people to it. So it's really hard for people to work in sort of both worlds at the same time, sort of the agile world and the non-agile world. So for those specific use cases, I would suggest try to take people and put them into sort of a parallel environment where they can work one way, so you can get really good feedback around how it worked and how it didn't work.
Okay, great. So we have a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. So the first question, it's a good one, and probably should have already hit on this a little bit, but how do we overcome MLR challenges for agile content delivery? So if modular is the answer, how do we come out of creating channel-specific content and making truly channel agnostic? I actually want to start with Brian, but then I want actually a global perspective on that too, because I think there's some nuances there that are important to think about with MLR.
Yeah, put me on the spot there, Carrie. I don't know that I
Audience
have an answer. I don't know that I have an answer. If I get on my soapbox for a second, I think one of the challenges with modular content and the way the industry is approaching it is it starts with this sense of channel-specific execution, and we get caught up in, we need a template. We need a template that can morph from web to detail aid to email, right? And you spend all this time creating these rigid templates with boxes where this component can end up in this place in this other channel. And not to say there isn't a place for that down the road, but I feel like starting there is the wrong place to start with modular content, because you end up creating something that is going to be very limited in the value and the use cases that it can accommodate. And inevitably, you're going to need to break that template down the road when there's a different design approach that needs to be taken. So yeah, I'm an advocate of not starting there and instead starting at the other end, which is more on the data and insight side. I'm a fan of starting your modular content efforts with, can we define our taxonomy clearly so that we know how are we going to label all of our content? What messages does it relate to? So then your content is easier to find. And when people engage with your content, it's easy to tie back to the message and the strategy that it was connected to, right? I think that's where you need to start with the topic of modular content, and then move into, taking content that's tagged appropriately, that's easy to find, that can be connected back to insight, and thinking about how do we now create channel-specific approaches to leverage this content effectively.
That's great. And any thoughts on the MLR challenges?
I have something that I'll build. I think that there's it's easy to lean on the MLR process as the bottleneck or the culprit for not being able to produce content faster, but I would suggest that organizations that do that probably have never measured the entire end-to-end cycle from all of the discussions and proofing and work that the marketers do with their actual creative agency, to the MLR process, to the digital production process on the back end. What we found is that it's really only a third of the cycle time, right? So if you focus just on that, you'll maybe improve that by at most a sixth or a fifth of the cycle time. You've got to work on the other stuff too. And I 100% agree with Brian. I would describe it differently. I would describe it as content planning. So do we really know who our micro segments are? Do we really know what those personas are that we're trying to create unique content for? Because we shouldn't just go about creating content for content's sake. It should be rooted in an insight that it's going to be meaningful to a specific audience or a specific place in the customer journey.
Nathan, I'm going to kick this one over to you also, because I think it's important to think about the global content supply chain as well in regards to that question. Do you have anything else that you would like to add?
I mean, MLR specifically, I think integrating that and getting it close to the pods, I think, don't suddenly throw a waterfall decision into, that's not a great place to do. So I think maybe people want to think about that. I think from a global perspective, what we're producing and sort of putting out there is sort of campaign structures, ideal customer journey. And also I think within this context, you start to think differently in terms of what is reasonable to receive at the global level. How far do you really want to go? Because then when we're going to start executing in the pods, in the markets, and how we're going to tailor and adapt things, I think that is also something that we've looked at and thought long and hard about what's really valuable from a global perspective. So I think that's certainly something that the individuals look into. And I think also we do know in certain geographies, you say we can be as agile as fast as you want, but then in certain geographies, there are sort of approvals of content that are external to ourselves, and you can get hit with those timelines. So people still need to sort of think about how we integrate with the local regulatory system as well on content.
Great. We have one other question here. What can the possible go to Agile strategies be to enable adoption in enterprise-wide applications, as Agile is a mindset more than a process? So to the points that you've all made about not being the Kanban, et cetera, how do you enable that adoption from a mindset perspective?
I don't have an answer, Carrie, but I can start,
Sure.
Which is, from an enterprise perspective, and I'm responsible for digital strategy and operations in U.S. pharma. So my purview is limited to the U.S. organization. And if I were to think about what would it take to have that transformation across the entire global Bayer organization, even cross-divisionally, right, across pharma and our crop science business and our consumer health business, and it's culture. It's cultural more than anything else. And actually, you know, we have a culture that's grounded in our overall bare values, and flexibility is one of those. And I think you could tap into, you know, your corporate culture, your corporate values, and look at where that type of transformation sits. And I think that's what you have to harness. You have to realize that, you know, again, to the point of, it's not just the methodology, it's the mindset shift. And ultimately that's a cultural challenge. So I would say start with culture, and that's what's going to fuel a broader, you know, enterprise-wide or corporate level shift to that type of mindset and that type of way of working.
Chad or Nathan, anything you want to add there?
I would say, you know, if the sense of the question is, you know, do we intend to turn the entire organization into some huge sort of agile? I just don't see it. We've applied it where we've had very clear and obvious problems, and it solved a solution. You know, so therefore we're not going to sort of take a solution and start running around looking for problems. So I just don't see it playing out like that. I think it works really well where we need this capability. As I said before, in terms of scaling this globally, yes, absolutely. You know, Agile is a methodology, it works. I think people see the common sense, the practicalities of what we're trying to achieve, and the problems that we have in executing our campaigns are not unique to a particular geography. They are, you know, common. The complexity is what drives us to really need to go, oh, we need to do something here. We can't just continue to muddle through how we are working. And I think I think someone was asking a question about international markets. You know, as that complexity rises, when people are truly trying to do omni-channel, you are going to have to think differently, because you cannot get, you know, hundreds of people around the table, all who've got little niche elements of work, and saying, yeah, we're all here to work. It just does not work. So I think complexity up, true ambition around omni, data-driven marketing, you're going to go down this path. Until you need to do that, until you get to that point, I wouldn't rush to something like this. I think you'd be sat there sort of scratching your head why we're really doing it at the moment.
Chad, just adding on, so there's another audience question. Do you think Agile is a process as opposed to people and technology functions? I think Brian shared that it's really a culture and a purpose kind of question, which I completely agree with, by the way. What do you think of Agile, in particular coming from IT?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's all three. I think it's process. There is a methodology that helps to facilitate an effective teamwork, and helps to draw out different ways of thinking through following the process. I think that it's also cultural, being able to align on, you know, a minimum viable product and a series of iterations that are going to lead to outputs, where historically maybe, again, perfection becomes the enemy of progress. That's a different way of working. And then in order to support that, there are technology tools that make it easier. In particular, as you have more use cases running in parallel, as you have more agile pod teams. If we're talking purely on the IT side, right, there are infrastructures that work better with agile development and promotion to production on a more regular basis than other infrastructures. But I believe it's all three: people, process, and technology.
I have one last question, and maybe we have a couple of minutes, just 2 minutes left, so we'll make it rapid fire to an extent. But how do you create a community of learning? So if there's many different agile teams, certainly many of them associated with a brand team, but there are also agile teams that can be established to test out something, to pilot something. And so how do you share learnings across all of these different teams to make sure that not only do you learn the good, but you also learn the hard parts that probably should not be repeated?
I think because of this change, I actually went through a process of reorganizing how we're structured to deal with those things. You know, you can look at Spotify examples of tribes and all these kind of things, but there is the need to keep this sort of connectivity as teams become focused. And I think organizationally, it's worthwhile thinking about how do you do that, and how do you keep focus around even particular roles that we've got there? What's the connectivity between particular roles of whether it's a community of practice, how we're sharing that knowledge, playbooks for particular roles within the structure are worthwhile. But that's certainly something that we've recognized, and as I say, as a consequence, just reorganized my organization. I know they love that, but it was because actually we're going to have to work differently, and we need to align how we're structured to respond to how work is getting done as well.
Anything else to add, Brian or Chad?
I think Nathan hit it. I don't know that I have anything specific to add on that one.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I hope this was insightful for the people who are watching, and really appreciate you joining us today. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thanks, Carrie.
All
Thanks,
right.
guys.
Thank you. Bye.